Okay, we just finished building the query successfully. We're going to now execute the query. So after I have the query built, I could use the connection string here. So this is my connection variable. I can use the connection variable to execute that query. So I'm going to store the results here, and I'm going to call my connection variable, execute a query with the query string that I built. Okay, when I run this query, I'm doing a select, so whatever was selected will be returned in this result here. If I do an insert, this will be true and false. If I do an update, this will be true and false. If I do a select, whatever the results are will come back. Now in this case, I just want to see whether the query executed or not. If I have a problem with the query or I can't execute the query for some reason, let's say the table name was wrong, then it'll come to this statement here. Error, please contact the system administrator, because it was not a user error. Maybe the query is wrong, maybe the database connection failed, whatever the case is. If I have a result, then when I'm doing a login, I actually don't need to check the username and password. I've already checked the username and password using MySQL. So if the username and password is correct, the match will come back. The match will just be the number of rows. So I can take the result, grab the number of rows. If the number of rows is equal to 1, that means they've typed the username and password correct. If it equals 2, well, most likely your table is wrong. You shouldn't have 2 users with the same username and password. If the table is 0, that means username and password is incorrect. So we're going to display an error on the login page. But if it does equal to 1, that means they typed their username and password correct. We'll continue with the procedure before, which was to set a session variable. Session was called logged in on this example, and we're going to put it to the username passed in on the form. Okay, so we're going to connect to the database. We're going to build a query. We're going to execute the query. If we're able to execute the query and the number of rows is equal to 1, go ahead and set the session variable and redirect the user to the page 1. If the results do not equal 1, most likely it's either going to be 1 or 0. If it's 0, they type the wrong username and password. We need to display that error message and then require that on the login form. Okay, if it's equal to 2, which it shouldn't be, but if it is, then your table structure is wrong and you have some error. Okay, so let's test this. So we ran the query. Let's see if we can get the number of rows back. You'll see as I'm programming, I'm doing incremental steps. First connect to the database, then make sure the query is correct, then execute the query and get the result. So if I update the code on the server and run it, this login should work. So I'll do a refresh. I'll type in test and test. Okay, what's going to happen is the PHP code will connect to the database. It's going to check the username and password. Username and password was incorrect, so it should display an error message. If I type the correct username and password, click on submit. It connects to the database, runs this query. If the query is equal to 1, which means the username and password is correct, I'm going to set the session variable and redirect them to page 1. So I'm on page 1. I can go to page 2. I can log out, which will clear the session variable. You want to make sure you also prevent URL hacking. So if I try to jump over to page 1 without doing the login, okay, you'll see it doesn't let me. I got that message there because it automatically typed HTTPS. So let's try it again. Let's type in page 1. Okay, you'll see it doesn't go to page 1. If I type in page 2, it also doesn't go to page 2. Now for the login, you'll see I also have this HTTPS redirect. So if you can get HTTPS working, I recommend it. And have the HTTPS redirect in all the code. So this is going to be the HTTPS redirect, which we did in the previous lecture. If you want to go back, you can look at the HTTPS redirect and how we coded it. This will ensure your connection is encrypted. You'll see the code to prevent the URL hacking is here. Every time I access a session variable, I need to call session start. Sessions are a little bit more secure than cookies. So I'm using sessions here with HTTPS with a database, which would be the most secure. So this would be a proper login. So now that I have HTTPS redirect on all the pages, I come back here and try to load a non-secure page. So if I refresh, you'll see it redirects me to HTTPS. And if I try to put HTTP here, try to do a URL hack, it won't let me. Okay, if I try to go to page 2 or page 1, try to hop over the login, it won't let me. If I type the wrong username and password, I get an error. So I'll do test and test. I get the error. If I do test and pass, it lets me log in. Okay, so this is the correct way to implement a login. Now, this is just our prototype. So we connect to the database, execute the query. If the number of rows is equal to 1, go ahead and set the session variable. Okay, this is just a example. We also need to close the results. So if the number of rows is equal to 1, go ahead and set the session variable. We also want to make sure that we close the connections. So I can do something like this, result close. That way I don't have a memory leak. And also my SQL connection, we want to close it as well so nobody can connect to our database. And we're going to exit this code. Okay, no reason to continue executing the rest of the code. Okay, so I'm going to run this. Okay, I'm going to run this. Let's see. May take this exit out. Oh no, that exit's fine. Let's run this code, see if it still works. Okay, so I'll do test, pass, click on submit. I'm able to log in. Page 1, page 2, using HTTPS, log out. Okay, and the login works successfully. Now, the database structure is not the best because I'm storing raw strings, just plain text in the database. So continue to the next video, and we'll figure out how we can do the login using a better implementation. We'll see you in the next video.